Hey everyone, it's Smarty Pants Chess here again, and we've got another CCC11 finals game between Leela and Stockfish. And this is a reverse fixture of the Trompovsky opening. This time Leela is playing white and Stockfish is playing black. But the opening book is exactly the same, so the moves are d4, knight to f6, bishop g5, which is the Trompovsky, black played knight to e4, bishop f4, c5 and then f3, queen a5 with c3, knight to f6 and then d5, queen to b6 and bishop to c1 to protect the pawn on b2. And this is the end of the book, and this is exactly what happened in the other game. And here the exact same move was played. Stockfish played e6, and this is exactly what Leela played as black as well. Leela now played e4, and that's exactly what Stockfish played. But now we have a slight difference here. Black now actually played e takes d5 and Leela recaptured. So already we have a slight difference between the reverse fixture. And this is actually a more common move to play. Black played bishop to d6, which is also more common, and Leela keeps the main lines with knight to a3, black castles, and Leela plays knight to c4 to attack the queen and the bishop. Now the main move here is actually rook to e8 with check, and white sidesteps this with king to f2, and then there's queen c7 and a4 from white to stop black from playing b5. But back to the game, Stockfish actually had novelty here and played the queen a6 move, which looks a bit dubious because the bishop now lines up against the queen. I suppose the queen does hit the knights on c4, but it looks really dodgy to me. Leela played a4, stopping black from playing b5, but actually black can now play b5 anyway, which is what Stockfish played. The point is that the a-pawn is pinned by the queen. But here actually Leela could go in for a nice exchange sacrifice. She could have played a takes b5 here. The point is that after the queen takes the rook, white can play knight takes d6 and has a pawn and a bishop for the rook. So if black now plays queen a5, getting the queen out again, white can continue with knight to e2, and if queen b6 there's bishop f4 to develop, and white's got a really fast development here. For instance, after bishop b7 and knight g3, white's doing relatively well, and I was thinking maybe knight takes d5 for black because it gains a pawn back, but actually white can play queen to d2, and after knight takes f4, queen takes f4. The point is that now white is doing really well. The knight on d6 stops black from playing rook to e8, covers the square, and also this pawn on b5, protected by the knight, covers the a6 square and the c6 square, really limiting how this knight gets out. So that was potentially what white could have played in this position. So a takes b5 was definitely an option. But instead, Leela decided to trade. Knight takes d6 was played, queen takes d6 was played, and a takes b5, and then queen takes d5. So both sides have just traded a pair of minor pieces and a pawn each, and they trade queens. Knight takes d5. Leela develops with knight to h3. Black does the same, fianchetting the bishop, and now knight to f4, giving black the option to exchange knights. Stockfish rejects this, dumps the knight back to f6. Leela develops with the bishop, a6 is played, and king f2. I think this is a better move. It stops white from castling, but I don't think casting is necessary in this position. It's better to have the king closer to the centre now that the queens are off the board. Stockfish continued, a takes b5, and then there was a trade of rooks. Rook takes a8, bishop takes a8, and then white regains the pawn with bishop takes b5. And already we're into a late middle game to end game already. So this isn't necessarily a complicated game, but Leela's just improving her own position. In this position particularly, it's actually given as white as better here. I think it's because white has the bishop pair and just has more dynamic piece play with the king in the centre and closer to the action. Play continued rook c8 and Leela played rook to d1. So already we can see that white has much more active pieces, and two pieces are already directing their attack at this d7 pawn. I was thinking d5 here for black, but I didn't see the move g4 for white. The point is that it's preparing g5, and this knight is protecting d5. So black is forced to play h6 here. If white continues with h4, they're preparing g5 again. And this knight is going to have to move, and white will just eat up a pawn on d5. So if I go back to the game, Stockfish played knight to c6 instead, blunting the bishop on b5. Leela played knight to e2, rerouting the knight, making space for the bishop to f4. Stockfish now plays d5 because the knight is no longer on f4. The bishop goes to f4 instead. Stockfish goes bishop b7, knight g3, and then g6 to cover the f5 square. And Leela attacks Stockfish, attacks the knight on f6. And now actually Stockfish has a counter attack. They attack the bishop on b5. But now Leela comes up with an incredibly clever move. I wonder what you'd play in this position. Of course white could just capture on f6, but Leela actually finds a great move to weaken black's position further. She actually plays bishop to c4 here. The point is that the bishop and the rook are attacking on d5, and the knight on f6 is still attacked. King g7 is an option for black to play, but then will just come bishop takes f6, king takes f6, take on d5, take on d5, rook takes d5, and if king e6, just rook d1, and white just emerges a whole pawn up. So to maintain their pawn, black is forced to take the bishop on c4, d takes c4, and then white just takes on f6. And now the material is equal, but black's just doubled their c-pawns, and Leela's got a very nice bishop on f6. Knight b5 was played by Stockfish. Leela continued with knight to f1, rerouting knight to e3 to attack c4. Stockfish plays knight to c7, and white's pieces are just too active. Knight to e3 attacks c4, preparing to win a pawn. This forces Stockfish to become defensive. Bishop a6 protects the pawn, but now comes rook to d6, eyeing up the bishop on a6. If black plays a mediocre move like h5 here, then white can just play moves like rook c6, prepares bishop to e5, attacking the knight on c7, and also still maintaining this attack on the bishop on a6. And of course the knight is also attacking this pawn. Black's in a world of trouble. For instance, even if bishop to b7, white can play rook takes c5 and just pick up a pawn. So even in this position now, black is in relatively a lot of trouble. Bishop b5 was played by Stockfish in the game. Leela continued with rook to b6, still eyeing up the bishop. The bishop goes to d7, and now all of a sudden the knight is free to take his pawn on c4 if Leela wishes. Instead though, Leela continued her attack. Bishop to e7. Now they're attacking two pawns. Both pawns are under threat, and black's got to decide what to do, which pawn to protect. If knight to e6, I think white just plays knight takes c4 and has a very nice game, just a pawn up. Stockfish opted for h6, and Leela just eats up the pawn on c4, and black played knight to d5, attacking the bishop. But now Leela is incredibly smart. She just tries to liquefy material. She plays rook to d6, attacking both the bishop and the knight. Stockfish takes the bishop on e7, and rook takes d7 is played, and white is just a solid pawn up. The knight on c4 is placed beautifully, protecting the b2 pawn. King f8 by Stockfish, rook to b7, h5, and knight to b6, attacking the rook. The rook goes to c6, there's moves knight d7, king e8, and here we see that the knight is just doing a lot of circular moves, just going round in circles, checking the king, attacking the rook, and Leela plays g3. After f6, again the knight jumps into c4, and Leela offers the trade of rooks, and after king d7 there's a trade. Liquefies more material, and Leela just plays king to e3. And this is actually a really simple endgame to win for Leela. She's played this incredibly well. This is like a human game against a computer, to be honest. After several more moves, Leela again tries to trade knights. But after more moves, the king is now in the centre, and the knight is the only piece protecting the c5 pawn. After several more moves, we see after c4 is played, this is easy win for white now. King takes c4, Leela's just two whole pawns up. And after several more moves, Leela's job is just to push the pawns up, and there's more trades of pawns, and after several more moves, this should be an easy win now. So I'll go through this quite quickly. King g4, knight d3, and again Leela just wins another pawn, and it's just a matter of forcing these pawns up the board. Again, I should just say here, in this position, knight takes b4, we'll still lose to moves like c5. If knight c6, there's king d6. If knight to e5, just knight to d4, protecting f3. King f7, just c6, white's going to queen the c pawn. So back to the game. Instead, Stockfish played knight to f4 in this position with check. But again, I think any player could win this position. But Leela just likes to take her time, and this is a bit weird. Again, we get a weird position. Leela just plays queen g2, here sacks the queen. I'm not sure why. But after several more moves, she gets another queen and decides to try and win this position instead. Fair play. So eventually it's queen and king versus king and knight, and Leela eats the knight up for breakfast, and it's checkmate. Queen to b1. So I think this game could have been over probably by move 60 if Leela wanted it to be, but she decided just to play on. But I really like the game for the simple nature. It's very Karpov play. Leela just increases her advantage. It's very positional. So we just see that Leela's got more dynamic pieces in this game and eventually just wins a pawn and then just wins the endgame. It's classic sort of Karpov or Magnus Carlsen style, very simple. Simple chess and makes it look very easy. But anyway, I really enjoyed this game, hope you did too. Please drop me a like, comment or subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.